Thank you, Ken. Now I'd like to yield time to my next door neighbor in the Rayburn room and a friend of mine, and I think the only senior member to me here today, Dan Burton, who personally knew Ronald Reagan very well. The gentleman from Indianapolis, Indiana, Dan Burton.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Let me just say that we all talk about what Ronald Reagan did as president and the great things he did for the country and for the world, but I want to tell you a story that's a personal story of mine. My mother was a waitress for 18 years, and my stepfather only went to the 7th grade. And I told him when I entered politics one day I was going to run for Congress, and if I got elected to Congress, I was going to take him in the front door of the White House and introduce him to the President of the United States. So finally I got elected to Congress after quite a while, and I called the White House, and I got a hold of Reagan's secretary, and I told her the story about how I'd promised this to my mother and how she'd worked for 18 years as a waitress and about my stepfather. And she says, well, let me talk to the president about it. So I got a call about a day or two later, and she said, the president can see you on this particular day. So I called my mother and my stepfather, and I said, I want you to come out. I'm going to take you in the front door of the White House to meet the president. Well, I came out. My mother loved Ronald Reagan as an actor. He was her favorite. And so here she was coming in the front door of the White House, and I've got her hand in one hand and my stepfather in the other, and they're both shaking because here they are, very common folks, and they're going to meet the most powerful man in the world and her great actor favorite. So we go in, and when we walked in the Oval Office, Ronald Reagan stole my heart forever, and I want to tell you why. He came up, and he looked at my mother, and he looked at me, and he put his arm around me, and he says, Miss Kelly, I want you to know your son is one of the brightest young men we have in Congress, and he's going to do great things for America. And I know you had to wait on tables, and I know he shined shoes, and I know you had a tough time. We had a tough time in my family like that. And he says, but I know things are going to be great from here on out, and you ought to be very proud of him. And I kept thinking, how does he know all this? And he had called my office to get information so we'd make my mother feel really, really proud and happy. And they took those pictures, and my mother carried those pictures with her till the day she died. And from that moment on, I'd have done anything for that guy. He could walk on water. He was not only a great president, he was a great human being. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Danny. We have a member here from Ronald Reagan's home state, and that's Bob Dole from Illinois. Bob, yield 1 minute to Bob.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Times have changed, but familiar challenges remain. We must strive to make our government smarter, protect America in a dangerous world, and create jobs here at home. As we enter a new era, we look to the past for guidance. To the man from Dixon, Illinois, who redefined our party and who reshaped the world. And we look forward, always with the optimism and confidence of our 40th president. At a time when the world stood at the intersection between freedom and tyranny, President Reagan's leadership made it clear that the American path was the right way to go. As we work to create jobs and rein in spending right now, it is critical that this Congress, and indeed all Americans, stay committed to his vision. Ronald Reagan trusted the American people, believing that we possess the strength of character to freely lead our lives, to grow our businesses, and to create jobs. As I talk with people back home in my district, one constant I hear is the desire for the federal government to simply stop making things so difficult on them, to get out of the way. Today we face great challenges, massive deficits, a weakened economy, and businesses struggling to provide jobs. Moving forward, we need not just a dose, but a full commitment to the principles of individual liberty and free markets championed by President Reagan. I believe we need to empower our citizens to create new opportunities for growth. Today, we admire President Reagan for his eternal optimism and his firm belief in American exceptionalism. I thank the gentleman for his time.
Thank you very much, Bob. You know, one of the things that creates a challenge for us on a special order like this is we have so many folks that want to speak and reminisce about what a great man Ronald Reagan was. and I only have so much time, so if you'll be sensitive to that, I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to recognize Ronald Reagan this afternoon that would like to. At this point, my neighbor from California and good friend, Gary Miller.
Well, thank you for giving me the time, Mr. Gallegly. I know you're honored to represent the library and our personal friends with the family, and that speaks volumes for your character. I rise today to honor the remembrance of the most beloved figure and inspiring man I know of in politics, the late Ronald Reagan. I think many members of Congress and politicians speak volumes for the man when they stand before a crowd and say, "I'm a Reagan Republican." Now, when you can leave a legacy like that behind, because not many people say they're a Miller Republican or a Gallegly Republican, but a Reagan Republican speaks volumes for who the man was. As we commemorate Ronald Reagan's centennial birthday, I'm honored to have the opportunity to reflect on his many accomplishments as a leader and a person. As president, Ronald Reagan believed in the American dream, and when he talked about the American dream, he always had this huge smile on his face because he believed in the American dream. His wisdom and leadership in promoting freedom, prosperity, and compassion and respect for all individuals guided our great nation during times of both tranquility and turmoil. President Reagan's strong belief in a limited government and fiscal responsibility should serve as a model for us today. As president, he refused to deviate from his principles and strong belief in power of the free market. His success in reducing taxes and government spending led to a period of unprecedented economic growth and prosperity. In the area of foreign policy, Ronald Reagan's support for a strong national defense strengthened America's standing in the world. His belief in America should serve as a beacon for democracy and freedom, and it's unrelenting. The Reagan administration took tough stance against communist regimes and negotiated treaties with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, culminating in the symbolic end of the Cold War and the liberation of millions across the globe. As we reflect on the life and legacy left by President Reagan, his astounding words of resolve bringing hope to our nation through these times of trial and tribulation. It is my hope that President Reagan's vision into our nation will long be remembered and revered. I'm honored to represent this man in California and say he's a hero, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thanks, Gary. The next gentleman I'd like to introduce, Scott Tipton from the state of Colorado. I had the real honor of showing Scott and his wife Jean around the library just last weekend, and we had a great time, and I'm sure you can attest to what a great venue that is and a tribute to a great man.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and indeed it was, and thank you so much for your hospitality. That was exceptional. Members, in 1976, I had the honor and pleasure of serving as the youngest delegate to the Republican National Convention. At that convention, I listened to Ronald Reagan tell us, "Go out and communicate to the world that we may be fewer in numbers than we have ever been, but we carry the message that they are waiting for." His words inspired me to the realization that ours is a nation of ascendancy and filled me with the hope for the future. Like then, the future of our country now depends upon our present actions and our ability to deliver a powerful message. Our message is and must be clear. We cannot continue down a path of reckless spending that satisfies government excess while enslaving future generations to insurmountable debt. It's time that we roll up our sleeves. For while many may have never met a government program that they do not like, it is time that we get to work cutting spending. We must embrace Reagan's prudence and heed his warning that government always finds a need for whatever money it gets. And remember that it is our responsibility to tend that fragile flame of liberty so that our children and grandchildren may know brighter days. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Scott. At this point, I'd yield a minute to the gentleman from South Carolina, Trey Gowdy. Trey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to honor a modern-day forefather who rekindled the foundational beliefs of our country, a leader who earnestly believed in American exceptionalism and the durable power of individual aspirations. At a time when the prevailing mood in our country suggested that our best days were in the past, a time when the challenges seemed larger than our capacity to meet them, President Reagan gave us a reason to hope, Through his words, through his actions, he forced us to take a hard look at ourselves, and in doing so, recapture the ideals that made this nation great. Hard work, perseverance, personal responsibility, the collective belief that when working together, greatness is always within our grasp. One by one, he re-inspired the robust American spirit of optimism that sustains us as individuals and unifies us as a country. He was a founding father of the new America, and for that we honor his memory and remain forever grateful.
Thank you very much, Trey. Mr. Speaker, would you be kind enough to advise me how much time we have left?
22 minutes. The gentleman has 22 minutes left.
Thank you very much. At this time, it's my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce another Californian, the gentlelady, the leader of the minority, Nancy Pelosi.
Are we going to get recognized?
It's recognized.
I thank the Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. Thank you, Mr. Gallegly, for calling this special order to give us the opportunity to join in a bipartisan way to celebrate and pay what would be the 100th birthday of President Ronald Reagan, and to do so with great pride as members of the California delegation. As you all, as we recall, it was a year and a half ago that we gathered in August of '06. The California legislature passed a law in a bipartisan way to have the President Reagan representing our state as one of the two statues in the Capitol. Just a year and a half ago, again in a bipartisan way, we celebrated the life of President Reagan by welcoming this statue to the Capitol. So for the last few years, we have been building in a tribute to the President. It's impossible to talk about President Reagan and the optimism he had for life and the love he had for our country and his patriotism without talking about Mrs. Reagan. They shared one of the great love stories of our time. Mrs. Reagan in recent years has turned that love into action, speaking powerfully out about stem cell research. In doing so, she has saved lives, found cures, and given hope to millions. Today, as we pay tribute to President Reagan, we also honor Mrs. Reagan for her service to our nation and for her love of her husband. And what would be his 100th birthday, we remember President Reagan's optimism for our nation, always believing that America's best days are ahead, and we share his patriotism, his life of service to our country. And to honor him, a Ronald Reagan Centennial Commission has been established, and I'm pleased to recognize 3 House appointments, 2 Republican, 1 Democrat, to the Reagan Centennial Commission, and thank them for their service to the legacy of President Reagan. Congressman Elton Gallegly, congratulations to you. Congressman Aaron Schock, one of the newest members of Congress and youngest, and Congressman Sylvester Reyes, who proudly serves in that capacity. Again, as a Californian, we take great pride in the fact that Ronald Reagan was not born in California, but from California, that his life of service and patriotism is recognized in the Capitol, and that today we send our deepest regards and respect to Mrs. Reagan in celebration of the President's 100th birthday. And again, thank you, Mr. Gallegly, for making this possible for
I
us
thank the
today.
gentlelady, our leader of the minority, and fellow Californian. Thank you.
Thank you, Elton. Thank you.
Paul Gassar from the great state of Arizona. Paul.
I thank the gentleman from California for yielding my time. Mr. Speaker, I stand here today to honor President Ronald Reagan and to commemorate his hope, optimism, and eternal belief that America is truly the greatest country in the world. Reagan once said, "It is not my intention to do away with government. It is rather to make it work. Work with us, not over us. Stand by our side, not ride on our back. Government can and must provide opportunity, not foster it, not smother it, foster productivity, not stifle it." I can think of no better time than the present to listen to the wisdom of Reagan's words. We are at a turning point in our nation, and the American people are asking for a government that works with the people, not one that picks winners and losers. I am forever encouraged by the words of Reagan and will always be inspired to keep his dream of a smaller, more nimble government alive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back my time.